Good to see everyone back in this room. Just a quick housekeeping announcement. We will have this lecture in here, but then after that, we'll have a short break, but then reconvene in the room that you migrated to this morning, down the hallway there. So I do want to thank our great events staff and all of our students for making that transition work so effectively this morning. You know, we weren't expecting like a Spanish heat wave or something, and so we really did want to try to make it as comfortable as possible. So thank you to the events team and to our student interns. So it's a great personal privilege of mine to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Bill Lyons. So Bill is an institution here in Knoxville, and I will make certain you recognize that by the end of this, but he came to the University of Tennessee in 1975 and joined the political science department. He had a very distinguished career in the political science department. He taught there for 30 years. But after 30 years, he was recruited to the mayor's office under Mayor Bill Haslam, where he stayed for another 16 years working under a total of 4 mayors. The very fact that we are here today in this, I think in this room, in this area, the fact that many of you get to go to a baseball game tonight just down the street, he has played a really indispensable role in that. To just give you some idea, if you've been to Market Square, how many of you, was it your first time in Knoxville, say yesterday? Into Market Square. Did anyone go to Market Square last night? All right, so if you go to Market Square, there's a pavilion there. It happens to be dedicated to Bill Lyons. That's how significant he has been in this community. He really is an institution. So the downtown redevelopment and revitalization that you get to see here, he was essential in leading that. Fortunately for us, after he unsuccessfully retired, we were able to recruit him. He was recruited to join the Baker Center, and then after that, he joined the Institute of American Civics, where he is our Associate Director for Community Outreach, and he has just played an invaluable role in helping build the Institute. One of his areas of expertise is state and local government. I think some of you received a copy of a textbook that he wrote on Tennessee politics. One of the areas of emphasis that we have in the Institute of American Civics is local government. We think that one of the problems that we're confronting as a nation is that there's too little attention paid to state and local government and too much attention paid to national government and national politics. And in fact, as national politics bleeds into state and local politics, many of those problems come to state and local politics through those national issues. So it is my delight to welcome Bill Lyons. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Thank you, Josh. Well, thank you, Josh. That was a very generous introduction, and I will have to add right before I get into the meat of this presentation what a pleasure it's been having Josh Dunn come to the University of Tennessee and assume the leadership of the Institute for American Civics. We've made phenomenal progress, starting literally from zero to where we are now with a very full-fledged set of courses, we're going to have a major sometime soon. We're sure in civics, but already we provided tremendous classwork with the great faculty that Josh has helped recruit. And this teachers, Frankie has done a phenomenal job, but Josh's leadership has allowed this event to grow and evolve over time effectively. So what I'm going to talk about is roots of American government, all the way through some issues in Tennessee, local government, and I have, as Josh indicated, the privilege, and it is a privilege, I didn't start out planning my career this way, but of being able to teach something for decades and do research in it and be an academic, and then actually participate in it for 16 years, and now come back on the other side. And that's, I would say, many people when I was in city government would say, well, now that you're here, look around, all of that stuff you do at the university, all of that theory, you can kind of throw that out. And I'd always dismissed that because a tremendous amount of what I was able to do was very much based on what I had observed, read about, researched, and what made government work. Give you one example. Political science, anybody in here has taken a whole lot of political science. You start off with a concept, what is the definition of political power? And all kinds of people had different definitions of it. And one that always struck me was being the last member of a minimum winning coalition. Meaning, if everything's even and you're the one who's going to make the difference, you then, for that moment at least, enjoy a tremendous amount of political power. And when I came into the city, there was a saying, we have 9 city council people, and there was a saying, you only have to count to 5. That everybody kind of snigger, meaning you just needed to worry about 5 council people. And then the 9, if you had your 5, you could ignore the other 4. And unfortunately, there was a lot of that was going on. However, that empowered every one of those 5 at any moment to make, and frankly, sometimes very unreasonable demands. So when I came in, I actually ran Bill Haslam's campaign for mayor and came in with him. One of the first things we discussed at the meeting was, whatever we're taking to city council, we're going to try to get all 9. We're talk to all 9, even if we know we won't get them. We're not going to, because you start getting intellectually flabby, lazy, all kinds of other things if you figure, I got my votes, so who cares? And that turned out to be very beneficial. Most of what we did, we had more than 5, but every once in a while, we didn't. So let's talk a little about local government generally. In the U.S., it's obviously got English roots, as most things do, and you started off with New England town meetings, direct democracy. In fact, there are still New England town meetings today. And that's when it doesn't work if you get a community much over 1,000. You can't assemble everybody to make all the decisions about the budget. Though interestingly enough, we have some people here in Knoxville that insist that we need to involve the people in all the decisions. It's like, okay, we can get 100,000 people, even though there's about that many registered voters in the city of Knoxville, put them in Neyland Stadium, flash a few things up on the scoreboard. That's not going to work in how you put together a budget. But it's still, elements of that exist because local government is highly participatory. You can't show up in Nashville and just grab the mic in the meeting of the State General Assembly. You certainly can't show up at Congress and walk up and address all of them. You can at every city in Tennessee and in fact in the U.S. There are public forums where people can come and they can speak. You have issues that are on the agenda that people could speak directly to. In fact, I'm on a task force. I'm going to have to leave and meet today. I'm still involved in city government where we're looking at all the rules governing that because the public forums have frankly gotten into very troublesome enterprises in many cases where people get up for 5 minutes and scream at the mayor or scream at other folks without a whole lot of substance. So we're thinking, maybe do we cut it to 3? Most cities and counties only allow 3. We allow 5. If we go ahead and do that, there'll be an uproar that we're, inhibiting citizen participation. But so be it. So you have direct democracy still connected. County government, I'm going to speak a little bit about too, because city and county government are the essence of what local government is in the United States. County government is still, especially in the South and even in Tennessee, and probably in many of the areas that all of y'all live and work, is still a system based on fairly limited services. The cities are cities are municipal corporations. They're founded to really take on the investment. One of the things that Josh alluded to, all the development of downtown involved using lots of development tools, tax increment financing, payment in lieu of taxes for private development, and other of what the state gives us, which is a fairly robust toolbox. Counties, for the most part, don't utilize them and don't see themselves as doing more than the fundamentals, law enforcement, the sheriff, education, obviously, keeping the roads going, those basic services. It's the cities that provide more of the services that people look for. Okay. Tocqueville, Democracy in America, fantastic book. I found myself perusing it more and more often, relevant to any study of American government at any level. And one of the things that actually Josh pointed this out to me, I didn't know that it was even there, is that he characterizes local government as an essential training ground for citizenship in America. And I found that to be absolutely true. Many people, and I have students who come, and some in this room, who observe city council or county commission, and you can see some it takes that you can be involved in the actual governing process and learn how things work. My involvement in downtown and getting involved with Mayor Haslam was when I was appointed to the Housing Authority Board here. And then I became chair through a whole series of events all too quickly. And then the mayor at that time, Victor Ashe, said, we're going to assign Market Square, which was the heartbeat of developing downtown, to the Housing Authority. And I read about that in the paper, by the way, one day, and went and called up the CEO and said, did you know we're doing this? Because it had failed 4 times miserably. And the downtown, I can just say, the downtown, now we have 90-something restaurants. It was closer to 9 back then, and all of Gay Street, most of it was shut down. Market Square was almost completely shut down. There was virtually no economic activity. Nobody lived here. Now we've got thousands of people, including me, who live downtown. So it's something that city governments have the tools to do, but they also, when you get onto a board, some people find themselves learning and being empowered and seeing they can make a difference, and some later they may run for legislative office, either at the city level, county level, some at the state legislature. So that's something that citizens learn as a practical aspect of governing. Another, there are workshops on and much more transparent policy making. I'm a total believer in be as open as you can about everything. It never works to try to hide stuff. So A, it's not the right way to govern, and B, somebody's going to discover what you're doing, and then you're on the defensive. So practically and morally and every other way, the local government, you can see the expectation of transparency that you don't see at any other level, state or national, and for practical reasons, and also for the kind of things that city governments and county governments get involved in, because get involved in stuff that's close to home. The roads, the parks, or greenways people can relate to, they get engaged in. Obviously, at the state level, there are fundamentally important issues that are dealt with, but they're usually at a little more global level, where you're talking about general policies that work all over the state. And that's the case for the federal level as well. So local government should be providing the foundation for engaged citizens and informed citizens. Funny, when I looked at it, I almost did a Freudian slip reading it. It says engaged citizens. I said, well, also enraged citizens, too. Got to deal with some of them. And we always have, and you got to love them. Bless their heart, as we say in the South. I grew up in Memphis, so I heard that all the time. For all of you West Tennessee folks. The people do, some people are hyper citizens. And that is everything. They come, they speak to council, they expect to be heard, and in some ways they can be very helpful, but also they get an inordinate amount of attention. And I often say, you know, it's a good thing everybody didn't know how easy it is to show up at a city council meeting and take 10 or 15 minutes of everybody's time to talk about whatever you want to talk about, because it's some people, it's therapy. All right, let's go back to we're going to get to the kind of structures we have in Tennessee and around the country. And the structure now are mostly, in Tennessee, they're virtually all large cities with strong mayor council cities. Most of the moderate-sized cities have city managers, not all, but most of them do. Then you have some smaller cities that use the weak mayor plan, and I'll talk a little bit about all of these. But historically, city governments have changed based on a crisis. And there was a hurricane in Galveston, Texas in 1900 that the entire government failed. It was dysfunctional, couldn't function. It had a mayor and some number of council. And there came, somebody invented something called the commission system. And the commission system means directly elect the the law enforcement officer, the police chief, directly elect the public works director, directly elect the finance director. Now, when I was growing up in Memphis way back in the 60s, 50s and 60s, we had a commission form, I vaguely remember, that got changed into a strong mayor form. City of Chattanooga had a commission form a lot longer. In fact, I was involved in a federal court case where a woman named Tommy Lee Brown, I think was her name, sued the city because there were 5 people running citywide, and African-American candidates were not being elected proportionally to under the Voting Rights Act. It's a complicated situation. I was involved in federal court on that legislation, and then the court ruled get rid of the commission system, and then we had a whole series of discussions that I was involved in as an outside expert about what to set up that would be suitable for Chattanooga. So if you don't like Chattanooga's strong mayor form, you can blame me, because I was one who recommended. Linda, is it okay? No? Okay, good. The form, not necessarily what it does. No, Chattanooga has been a very well-governed city for a long time. Council manager plan, that originated in Stanton, Virginia in 1908, and that was an early part of the reform movement that came up in reaction to city government becoming overwhelmed by patronage, elected officials hiring their buddies, their family members, inefficiencies, and that was especially pronounced in places like New York with Tammany Hall. Sort of the Mayor Daley is kind of model, in Chicago is like that. That the government really is there not so much to provide efficient services, but to be helping groups of people and supporters and enabling people to progress in their political careers. And the council manager form was a move to make government professional. And and most of you, I think very many of you, I'm sure, live in cities with city managers. And a city manager is somebody trained in a program like we have here at UT, and there is one at ETSU specifically, I think it still exists, that trains city managers, that you became a professional at delivering services, about HR, all the things that come up, and you expect that city to be run. I always cringe, run like a business, because cities don't exactly make profits, and what they provide is services. So there's the model, the connection to business, in quotes, is a dotted line. However, I do think cities need to run using business-like practices. And that's what really takes place, ideally, in a city manager, council manager plan. And in that case, the city council chooses this manager, and the mayor is more ceremonial, and that person runs the city. That's more suitable for a homogeneous city, moderate-sized city, works very well. Oak Ridge is an example of one, Maryville and Alcoa around here. Most of the moderate-sized cities use this. Then the one I don't have up there, which is the dominant one, is the strong mayor system, which Nashville, Knoxville, Memphis, Chattanooga have, and some others, but all 4 have, and that's where you elect a mayor and empower that mayor with a lot of executive authority. When I worked for Mayor Haslam, he appointed me. That did not, in some cities it does, council didn't have to okay that. I didn't have to be confirmed. Every single person in the city of Knoxville worked under the umbrella of the mayor, reported indirectly at least up through the mayor. And that's the case in most of the cities. The only exception was the popularly elected city judge that we have and many communities have. But the strong mayor form is the one that people kind of look out for and say, with that amount of power, and with a larger system and lots of employees, that's something that can be subject to abuse. But most of the research that's done, and people have studied this, have showed strong mayor systems work a lot better when you have diverse populations and representation on council, and they're able, because then it's a little bit of a fiction of how business-like government can be. Government in a city like Knoxville, certainly Memphis, Nashville, Chattanooga, is representing the views of diverse interests. You've got various groups who want recognition and expect recognition. You've got more complexity, and that's something that kind of overwhelms the city manager in many cases. That is, efficiency is a value. It's not the only value. I say responsiveness to electoral concerns is a value as well. So we have those two. Then there's a couple other phenomena that have taken root, and especially this third one is very relevant. I'm going to come back to in Tennessee, and that's home rule. That is, cities, if the state allows, cities can decide some things without having to go to the state legislature and independently, because otherwise the city is totally a creature of the state legislature. And that home rule is somewhat limited, but it provides cities, and there's county home rule as well. It provides them with some ability to structure things differently without I could say tinkering, and you'd see my bias having been at the city for 16 years from the state legislature. Another is civil service reform, and that is another thing to a professionalism notion that goes along with the same thinking under city manager, which is we've got to have a professional workforce where people are hired based on their qualifications, not on Uncle Jim is running the garbage truck over here, and I'm going to get, Bobby on the crew and that sort of thing. And then you extend that into a much deeper level. And I know about that because I happen to be. Sometimes I talk to my colleagues, Josh and Andy, about the difficulties of being chair of the Civil Service Commission here, which I am. So we deal with all kinds of interesting questions about when people think that the testing for police is racially biased because of the outcomes, and we have to look at the test, or that the procedure is out of bounds that doesn't allow for professional, non-political conduct of city business. Civil service is really important at all levels, and obviously I believe in it, or I wouldn't have accepted the position to be chair of that board. But it's an anti-patronage kind of notion, and that's not, in most counties in Tennessee, including Knox County actually, you do not have an official civil service. Now you've got protections that you enjoy as a citizen, but you don't have anything like, civil service protections is almost like tenure. Sometimes I think if you have somebody, a difficult faculty member or a difficult city employee, it's about as much of a challenge to come up with a solution for some of those problems. So let's talk a little bit about Tennessee, starting with county government. I'm sure you all know we got 95 counties. That's in the Constitution. And county government you can look at as an extension of state government. City government, on the other hand, is a voluntary creation that exists under the auspices of the state government, but it's not just an extension of it. Everybody lives in a county, not everybody lives in a city, because a city is a voluntary, it's a municipal, known as a municipal corporation. So what you have is a county mayor, used to be called chief executive, and he's chief financial, he or she, chief financial officer. You got a county legislative body. Now the state sets the limits on how large that can be. That sometimes was quite large. Ours in Knox County is 11. And under our home rule charter, we can decide in Knox County how large the county commission ought to be. It's partisan. City governments in Tennessee are not partisan. There's some move to make them that way, but they're not now. School boards, I'm going to not talk too much about school boards. School boards are partisan and nonpartisan. The General Assembly allowed counties to decide themselves whether they wanted to move to partisan elections, and there are all kinds of political reasons why people wanted that. I'm pretty much a believer in local government being as nonpartisan as possible, because I'm a lot more pragmatic than ideological. That doesn't, especially at this level, that doesn't apply to everybody. Every county government has the constitutional officers, and these turn out to be kind of interesting. They're in the Constitution. That's why they're called constitutional officers, obviously. The sheriff, you all know what the sheriff does, keeps order, popularly elected. You've got to have that person. The trustee keeps track of the money. Now, the register of deeds keeps track of the property. County clerk keeps the basic records for the county. And the assessor of property is a very important person who determines what the value of commercial and residential property is for tax purposes. And I'm sure some of you in here have got, God, I got my home is assessed at, $300,000. That's ridiculous. Jimmy across the street's at $250,000, and I'm going to go protest that when I pay taxes. These constitutional officers have to exist. Now, this becomes relevant when you get into things like Nashville-Davidson that I'm going to talk about. So back in when it got formed, and I'm going to talk a little more detail about it, our question was, we're going to go from Nashville and the various communities in Davidson County to metro government. Well, any large city has a police chief responsible to the mayor. That's what we have in Knoxville. It's what all the big four cities have, including Nashville now. And if you had in a large city the chief law enforcement officer not responsible to the mayor, you can get into all kinds of really difficult situations. You have a mayor that'd be helpless that anything that went on in the world of law enforcement, and as y'all know, that can be extremely controversial. So when Nashville got created, one of the choices they had to make was, well, what do we do with the sheriff? Anybody know what the sheriff does in Davidson County since they have elected police chief? Runs the jail. That's right. The sheriff runs the jail. Now, I'm going to talk about consolidated government a little more in a moment, but Knoxville has tried 4 times to emulate Nashville. I was involved in the last one. We failed all 4 times because to create a metro government, you have to have a majority of people in the central city vote for it, and a majority of people in the county outside the central city vote for it, and the people outside the central city almost never vote for it. Why? Because they figure they're going to pay more taxes. And also you get into things like you're going to lose your right to elect the sheriff. You're just going to be electing the jailer. And people do not like losing their right, in quotes, to vote for people, even if they're not quite sure what's going on. Now, people have a lot of attitudes about sheriffs usually. Okay, let's talk about town and city governments. I mentioned a little about the mayor, strong or weak mayor, city manager, council, commission. There are virtually, I don't know, there may be a commission form somewhere in Tennessee. I'm not aware of it. That's a dying, if not a dead breed. You've got city-county consolidation. That was done under a the last major constitutional convention we had, which was 1953. And we've had 3 constitutions. Now, a lot of people, you may hear from your students or from their parents, from the media, Tennessee, we're kind of a backward state in a lot of ways. We were a real leader on this. The ability to consolidate city and county government was, Tennessee was the first, if not among the first 2 or 3, that allowed that to happen. And then immediately after that, Nashville tried to implement it by having votes inside and outside, and it failed the first time, which I believe was 56 or 58. So after that, it's interesting, people will say, you drive into Davidson County, you drive into Knox County, Hamilton County, say, here's where all the urbanization is. In Knoxville, it's out by Farragut, and you're coming in, and all of a sudden you hit a sign that seems very arbitrary. Here's the city of Knoxville. Now you're in the city. It looks just the same on one side of the sign as the other side of the sign. So logically, if you were going to, and logic and government, are not necessarily a great mix, but logically, you would expect, we ought to just have the city be where the urban area is. And that took place by cities annexing historically. But that started to die away when the small communities would incorporate outside the cities, Bellevue, I believe, in Davidson County and others like that, and have their own set of services. And the idea was, well, let's try to find a way to set up a system that enables the entire area to help operate under one government. Now, I think, this is editorial, but it's not too controversial. One of the main reasons, if not the main reason, that Nashville is the city that it is, love it or not, I think it's pretty darn impressive. You got some livability problems, but what is it now? One of the most attractive cities, companies moving there, lots of growth. By most measures, this is a very successful enterprise, is because they were able to combine their governments. Because otherwise, you have a hodgepodge, a patchwork of services, and if you're trying to recruit a business, oh, well, that business, we have this in Knoxville, Knox County. Well, if they locate here, then they have to talk to the county mayor. If they locate here, they talk to the city mayor, and there's a lot of confusion about who, if they want a set of incentives, who they go to. So we failed 4 times, always got outvoted outside the city. A lot of people continually, I give a talk like this to the leadership of Knoxville here, and people always go, when are we going to have metro government? And I say, never. Or not in my lifetime, and probably not in y'all's lifetime, because the issues, the divide, it's become, the city is very Democratic, outside the city is very Republican, the bodies look a lot different, and I think it took a very incredibly unique set of circumstances for Nashville to actually pass it in 1962. And the way that happened briefly was that the mayor then, Briley, decided, I'm going to start annexing like mad outside the city, bringing them all into Nashville. And a lot of the rural people outside the city went, wait, if we come in, we're paying the full property tax load. We don't like it. And there was a movement later to say, if you'll set up a charter for us to vote on that has us pay less, it's called you have the urban services zone and the general services zone, you're actually protected from paying for services that you don't want. So that ended up working. Now, there's one thing at the bottom I'm going to talk a little about, that if you're involved in local government at any level, especially any kind of city government, you got to be incredibly aware of. Dillon's Rule. Iowa court case that's become the model nationally since the 1800s. The city is a creature of the state. And that is incredibly obvious if you're involved in city government. That is, the state legislature just changed the way we elect our council here on its own a couple of years ago. And then this year's election will be the first time we're doing it. There was a lot of pushback. Why are you doing this? And there was a way to do it even under home rule. We want to govern ourselves like we want to govern ourselves. And the state legislature points out, and I always say, this is the way it is. I don't believe in whining about this kind of stuff. The people have figured that they have a right as a citizen of the state that protects them from arbitrary actions and structures at the city level, and that's the way it's set up. The city is something that has to exist under the guidance, the control, whatever, under the state legislature. Those of you in Nashville know that became very obvious. The state legislature said, cut your council in half. There wasn't a great movement in Nashville to cut it in half, but I believe it's going to happen. I mean, it's been in court, and it was 40 people, I think, 39 or 40. I had enough trouble dealing with 9 council people. I can't even imagine trying to deal with 40. But nonetheless, that's what was that was part of actually the consolidation effort. So, and that brings up the whole notion of home rule. What can cities and counties who have home rule status, what can they do? And what can the state do? And basically, home rule gets you some protection from what where the state interjects, but it's pretty limited. For instance, we got a sales tax referendum coming up in Knoxville. The state sets the state sales tax rate and says cities can have up to a certain amount. They can get it all the way up to 9.75, state and local combined. We have 9.25 in Knoxville right now. Cities vary. Most of the larger cities have the 9.75. And you can't go any further, home rule or not home rule. Property is assessed in certain ways. I would have people come in and say to me, when I was at the city, when my title was chief policy officer for a while, we got these surface parking lots. They're the worst thing you can have, the worst use of property downtown. We ought to tax them at their potential rate rather than their actual rate to encourage people to develop. And I always go, well, you can think that all you want, but under the state constitution and state law, we are very limited in how we can tax property, so that's off the table. Or people would come in and want us to have different levels of taxation based on the value of the property, so it'd be a progressive tax system, a little bit analogous to the federal income tax. Can't do that stuff. You've got the state laws governing what cities can do, and if any of you from Memphis know, the state starts getting very upset when they see what they seek to be inefficient government or a waste of money or other things that are utilized, and they can step in and say, we'll take over this service. We can take over, under certain circumstances, law enforcement in a community if you want to. So the state is incredibly powerful, and a municipal home rule only gives some protection. Now, one of the protections is the state at that point can't come in and say, we're going to apply something just to Oak Ridge. It's got to be general in nature. It's got to go to a class of cities. Now, there are ways to get around that. Say you want to apply something to Davidson County and Shelby County. This will apply only to counties with a population over 400,000. And then it applies to those too. Or you could even specify it even more like limited than that. Small numbers have adopted home rule charters. Even a smaller number of counties have adopted home rule charters. So I want to take a little bit of time and talk about the challenges and some of the issues, and then leave some time for discussion. There are a lot of challenges facing local government. Right now, local governments get an awful lot of money from the feds, and an awful lot of that has got now being shut off, or it's being constrained or limited in certain ways, and that puts a lot of pressure on local government. One of the biggest issues under Dillon's rule is something called preemption, and that is a continual battle, though again, I tried not. To me, you're going to be most effective when you work with people. So I don't like talking about battles too much. I like talking about ways you can work cooperatively with the state legislature. And a lot of people really like, I know you'll find this hard to believe, politics to them is we're going to get angry, we're going to get excited, we're going to yell at people, we're going to call them idiots, and that isn't a very effective strategy in dealing with the state General Assembly. And some people insist on doing that. I'll give you one example. Early in the Haslam administration, when the Second Amendment folks got particularly energized in politics here and elsewhere, cities had the option to say you can have laws that outlaw guns in parks. Well, that sounded pretty reasonable to me. I mean, I don't want kids playing on the seesaw or playing baseball and somebody thinks they see something, pull out their gun and start blasting away at the park. It was a misdemeanor and a $50 fine to carry a gun in a park. We had that law in Memphis. All the big four cities had that. No guns in parks. The state General Assembly came in and did it in two phases. First phase was you're going to have a special vote on this, and they just outlawed it. So they said to us, well, too bad, you cannot limit guns in parks. And it was a Second Amendment issue, or portrayed as that. Now, and I would tell people, okay, I don't really like that, because I'd like us to make that decision. On the other hand, I can see the logic of it. One of the logic was, when you're traveling across the state, do you know what rules apply in what community? You don't want to have to say, I can have a gun in this one, I can't have a gun in this one. But if you have a right as a citizen, some people saw a city as a municipal corporation, as an entity that took that right away. And that is the logic, and if you talk to people in the General Assembly, that's what they tell you. Say, we're protecting people's rights as citizens under Tennessee. We argued with that one. I'll give you a couple of other examples of preemption that we either tried to fight or work with. Interesting thing about cities, the first level of regulation on new stuff is in cities. What do I mean by new stuff? One of them was Airbnb, short-term rentals. When I came into city government, there was no such thing as Airbnb. So then Airbnb appears, and people start, hey, I'm going to lease out my house. I'm going to buy a house in this neighborhood, and I'm going to make an Airbnb. Entrepreneur-type people invest the money. business, make it a little business. Well, unfortunately for their neighbors, oftentimes this becomes very problematic, and the neighbor loses its character. It takes homes off makes the available of rental homes more difficult. Hotels don't like it because they weren't paying taxes. So who's going to deal with Airbnb? We started dealing with it in Knoxville. We had a year-long process. It's very different than the process in Chattanooga or in Nashville. But everybody was trying to deal with what their problems were. And Sevier County, obviously, is a whole different world as well with all the tourism. So we went through this entire process, came up with a set of regulations, balancing all the interest, all the meetings, and then Airbnb says, we'll just go to Nashville and go to the state and say, regulate it at the state level. Then we can lobby you, and we'd have one set of regulations across the state. I had to go over and testify in front of the State and Local Government Committee. We survived by one vote, not having the state take over the regulation of Airbnb, and we thought we really had a process that fit us better. It was funny, the people from, those of you from Nashville probably aware, it was a huge concern there because of the shortage of hotels and the growth of Nashville. Neighborhoods in Nashville were coming in and saying, you know, I'm the only house left. There's Airbnbs all around, and you had your bachelorettes who were staying there, and people are coming in drunk at 3 in the morning. My best remembrance of that was during the testimony in Nashville. A woman got up and said, would you please let us regulate this stringently? I'm tired of waking up at 4 in the morning with a racket and seeing somebody urinate on my cat. Thought that was pretty interesting. So anyway, but that was an example where we fought off preemption successfully, again, not by yelling at the legislature, but going over and arguing that we really did have sets of interests that were different. Another challenge facing local government, nonpartisanship. You have nonpartisan local government, technically, but more and more and more in Knoxville, and I've been involved in elections as election consultant in a few other communities, you've got now creeping partisanship. And to me, it's like rather than local government, which I think still functions pretty darn well, as opposed to national level, which almost everybody agrees is not functioning all that great. Let's not have the hyper-partisan hatred. Nobody can talk to each other. There's no compromise. We don't want to have that spill down to the practical level of government. But in the city of Knoxville now, which is technically nonpartisan, there are literally shadow tickets run by Democrats and Republicans based more on national interests. And that, I think, is an unfortunate trend, regardless of what your bias may be on these issues, because the challenges that you face really are practical. You take Knox County government is partisan. Thank God the major decision was made by Mayor Jacobs, who's Republican, with the head of the leading county commissioner, Courtney Durrett, an ex-student of mine, parenthetically, who's a Democrat, where they combined on how we ought to deal with the juvenile court and juvenile justice in Tennessee. And for most part, you don't have that hyper-partisan overlay that you do. Now, you're getting there on school boards because a lot of the school issues are national interests, whether it be charter schools or vouchers or the issues that you had around masks and that sort of thing. Public input. That is getting to be, and that's one of the things I'm dealing with in this task force. It is now getting, and I took my colleague Josh with me to a city council meeting a couple of years ago where a city council member had placed on the agenda a resolution about, after October 7th, basically a pro-Palestinian resolution on Knoxville City Council. The meeting was flooded with people, very emotional, about 60% who were very pro-Palestinian, Israel should stop what it was doing in Gaza, 40% Jewish community, all mixed together, people cursing and screaming at each other. And as many of the council people said, and I agree, there isn't anybody involved in any of this in Gaza, Israel, any of the Middle East. waiting for the resolution of the Knoxville City Council. And then the thing died without a second, but it was incredibly divisive. And it pitted people against each other more and more. That type of thing is becoming more and more common, and you really can't prevent it, and you can't prevent people from bringing those issues in. But on the other hand, it gets very difficult when you've got people there dealing with an important land use issue that affects the value of their homes, or something like that, or an initiative on parks and greenways, sitting for 4 hours while we go through all that kind of stuff. And then people get discouraged, they leave, they get cynical about local government, and all of that, the political science part of me really becomes uneasy when people start not trusting the local government. Another related to public input thing to talk about is participation. Voting turnout in local elections is very low. And it's getting lower. Give you an example. Knoxville had fewer people, I'm trying to think what year to go. In the late 70s was when this election, in the early 80s, 50,000 people would turn out and vote in a mayor's election. When Mayor Haslam won, he won with there were about a total of 30,000 votes cast. When Mayor Kincannon won, it was in the 20s. Just city council races, some of them were as low as 6,000. And here's the other little trick if you're running for, and I tell people this, the people who cast the votes are overwhelmingly over 55. And people 18 to 25 is a tiny sliver of who votes. So I always, that's one of the reasons I like having young people come to these meetings and getting them engaged, because it obviously affects them. But if you're young, you don't have the stake in the community, you probably don't own a house, you maybe aren't going to stay there the rest of your life, especially if it's a college town, and you may figure, I'm following the news, I'm looking at bombing and, of sites that get all of our attention, or healthcare, or all these national issues. It's hard to get that interested in the local issues, though they do affect folks. So anybody running is to realize that the dominant voice is going to be the older folks. Now, I'm being one of them, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but so be it. Okay, I think it's time. We got about 13 minutes left. Certainly y'all have some questions, challenges, discussion items that we could engage. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Talk about Moore County, one of the most rural counties in the state of Tennessee, has a metropolitan government.
Right, Moore County does. Morristown, I believe, Hamlin has some elements of it. That is, in that case, there isn't that division between city and county, or town and county, that's nearly as pronounced as it is when you get into the larger cities. That is, you do, and the tax rates of the cities are not that viewed as being that onerous. So sometimes it's really a case of the personalities involved that campaign for it. So it's not, there are some, it's still unusual, but and I think, now if you did a study, are they better governed necessarily? They're certainly not worse governed. But I don't expect to be a great growth in that, but there are real economies of scale you can get into. Do you need a city, like people in Knoxville will say, do we really need a city park department and a county parks department? Let's just have the county parks. Now, there's nothing to prevent the cities and counties from voluntarily agreeing, hey, and that's what they did in Los Angeles, at least for a long time. The city of Los Angeles would provide services for the county outside that under an agreement. So it turned out to be one. So you've got efficiencies, but you've always got a little bit of uneasiness of people outside the central town about losing their ability, being in something larger and losing their capacity to control what affects them. Yes?
And Deb, actually, can we wait 1 second? Here we go.
Okay.
We want to make sure you guys get the microphones for asking the question.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on the primaries being instituted into local government elections?
Well, We have nonpartisan primaries with a lot of them now, and as long as it's nonpartisan, of course, the idea is you'll have more than 50% before somebody's elected. That's probably a good, I mean, I like having that because otherwise, if you've got 6 candidates, somebody could win with 17% of them who's an outlier. Now, when you've got partisan primaries, like in county government, that's a whole different matter, but I think that's pretty well set, and you know, I don't find that to be where the primary problem is problematic in governing is more at the state and especially the national level when you get into the gerrymandering where you have the safe Democratic and safe Republican areas and then all the actions in the primary. So you end up getting the more extreme people in either party elected. So that's the way I would look at that.
I was just wondering, is there any limit on property taxes? And because in some places it's almost like you're paying rent even though you own it. And is there any attempts anywhere to kind of limit that? I just wondered what your thoughts were.
You know, interesting question. Are there any limits on property taxes? There are no limits on the amount, but at the state level, there has been discussion and in considering either legislation or a constitutional amendment to require a vote on a property tax. Now, right now, the council, city councils can raise the property tax or county commissions can raise it with no popular vote. Sales tax takes a vote, but there are some people, active folks in Middle Tennessee especially say, we would like to say if you're going to raise that property tax more than some small amount, you're going to have a referendum, which of course would limit it. That's probably the main effort that's out there to try to limit property taxes. Of course, part of the problem, if you're in city government like I was, unless you grow, you don't gain anything from the increase of value because the way it's set up, you can't have the assessor appraise his way or her way to more money. That is, when you do all the property appraisal and everybody's house is worth more, and then the tax rate for that city or county has to go down to reflect that. So, you know, you can't, so you're not going to get any more money. The way you get money is growth, new stuff, either redevelopment. And that's one of the things that I used to talk about in terms of downtown. I mean, we were unable to annex anybody in the state very much anymore. You can't grow like that. You can grow internally, and you can grow developing your urban core, which is oftentimes deteriorated. I mean, the amount of property tax capacity just in downtown Knoxville is millions and millions and millions a year because given one building that was appraised at $900,000, Class C office building, the Holston down on Gay Street, after it redeveloped into condos, is now appraised at $35 million. And that's all, and that is new money. So, you know, that as long as counties grow, there's less, and cities, there's less pressure on that. But you get into, I know Nashville's proposing a big increase. The mayor's proposing a big increase. I don't know if it's passed yet, but, you know, we've had significant increases here. So, you know, I think there's a reasonable possibility that there will be a required referendum on property taxes at some point. Yeah, right. Yes, sir.
So I was out of state for several years, and I came back right when, or shortly before the referendum on the amendment to the Constitution adding right to work. So I was confused by it. Do you feel that needed to happen, or what was going on with that?
My bias is that when Tennessee is the hardest constitution in the state to amend, in the country to amend. You've got to go into 2 separate legislative sessions. You've got to get supermajorities. Then you have to have a vote, which is in essence a supermajority because it's based on the number of people who vote in the governor's election. And anyway, y'all probably realize most of how that works. It's very hard. So when you start putting stuff in the Constitution, then if times change and the legislature or the populace wants to change it, like go back to the pre-right to work, you can have your own bias on whether that's a good thing or not, depending on your attitudes toward labor and business and everything, then it's very hard to change. That's why we have a constitutional amendment that passed to limit the income tax. To not have an income tax in Tennessee. We cannot have one. Now, I'm not necessarily in favor of an income tax. In fact, I'm not in favor of an income tax. However, it seems like that is not the kind of thing you want in the Constitution, because times change, and the only way we would get one is if a majority of the elected officials voted for it. So what you're doing when you put it in the Constitution, you're preventing a majority in the legislature from voting on it. So always, that's the way when you ask that good ideas are needed, I always go, I'd like to see those things more done at the legislature where another legislature could change it if times changed, rather than sticking things in the Constitution that are really policy matters. That's my bias on that. Time for one or two more, I believe. Yes, ma'am.
Could you speak to, you talked about how the city managers had educational opportunities to really learn that thing. How is that true for the average Joe Smith who becomes a county commissioner or a city council member? What type of education do those people have opportunity to have or require to have?
Okay, good. Really interesting question. If you want to run for any legislative body pretty much anywhere, definitely county commission, city council, you don't really have to know anything. And in fact, it's gotten shocking. Talk about the nationalization of city politics. I've noticed there was a path to being a city council, county commission person, which used to be you might be a business leader, you might be a neighborhood leader, you might show something that showed your capacity to take on larger tasks. I've noticed here and elsewhere, people run on stuff they're for, national issues usually. And you'll have people on city council or county commission everywhere who really make no pretense of really trying to understand how the budget works or understand the financial management and the things you need to do to keep the city solvent, or to realize that cities can't go into debt, so you just can't spend money you don't have, or that type of thing. So no, there are no requirements. You would hope the voters would sort of use that as a screen, but they don't. Now, city managers, obviously the city set their own limits. Almost everybody wants somebody with the appropriate training. Not always in city management. Sometimes it's engineering, something like that, or somebody that just happened to have kind of developed the skills. But city managers, that's a very tough job because you're working for a majority of a city council. And the minute you can be as professional as you want, but what happens when city council, Joe, the city councilman, comes in and says, I want you to hire my brother-in-law to run that street crew? And you go, are you going to hire the brother-in-law? Because if you start hacking off that city council person, they may introduce, let's fire you and get a new one. So if you want to be a city manager, great job. Some people keep in it for decades, but you got to be ready to move around a lot. It's hard to keep your job.
So if I'm elected to the county commission, there's no requirements once I've been elected for any educational opportunities? Because I've observed that a lot of county commission meetings, and I'm appalled.
Right. Educational opportunities are out there. Like in county, you've got UT's got County Technical Assistance Corporation, or Service rather, CTAS. You got MTAS for municipal, but a lot don't avail themselves. Some people avail themselves because they're in legislation. There's certain advantages to it, but no, there's no requirement. And really, when you're talking about county government in a lot of places, you're talking about, people very much representing, constituencies that maybe aren't that interested in education and other things. It's just the way it is. So, you just have to work around that. No, but there are some, I'll gratuitously say that, there's some very good commissioners and council people too. I know y'all realize that, and school board members. Well, I think I'm out of time, so thanks for your attention and the good questions, and enjoy the rest of the time here.